What's going on, guys? I'm Nick the Tutor, and I've helped thousands of students prepare for tests like the digital SAT, and today I'm going to give you an expert tutor's reaction to the first digital SAT in March, which most of you know was a total and utter disaster. I'm going to talk about why this was the case and how we can improve it, so let's get into it. So in this video, I'm going to go over my top 3 reasons why the digital SAT was so difficult and so challenging for many of you. So let's get straight into number 1, which was the practice test materials that the College Board gave out. The first 4 practice tests, and especially the first 3 Blue Book tests, are entirely too easy. So any of you guys out there who use those tests to prepare are definitely going to feel like the first digital SAT in March was very hard. Why the College Board did this, I don't think anyone knows, but basically those first 3 tests, test 1, test 2, and test 3, are overly easy when you compare that to what students experience on the digital SAT in March. One positive that came out of this was after the March scores came out, people were outraged. So let me give you guys a little bit of background on what happened on the March SAT. Basically, everybody said that the March digital SAT was way harder than anyone expected. Now, most students would say, most parents would say, this is totally unfair. Why do they do this? How do they do this? I'm going to explain all that in this video. But basically speaking, let's talk about the College Board's marketing strategy. They give out free tests. They gave out the PSAT. They want students to take the digital SAT. So therefore, those materials had to be approachable and doable for students. If they gave out practice tests and the PSAT and it was all impossible, then no one would have wanted to take the digital SAT and everyone would have went ACT. Now, let's talk about my first factor as to why the College Board digital SAT in March was so challenging. Number 1, like I said, the practice tests. Practice tests 1, 2, and 3 were entirely too easy. Anyone that did those tests on the Blue Book app were getting huge scores. I had students getting 1,500 plus scores on those tests, and it was way too easy. They were only getting a handful of problems wrong. Then they went and took the real digital test. They still did well, but they felt that it was much harder than they expected. Now, we have a third-party testing app, and I'll put a link to that below that actually simulates the real difficulty of the digital SAT, so you definitely should check that out. But whatever you do, you need to practice with more appropriate materials than the first 3 digital tests. One of the good things that came out of all the outrage about the digital SAT was the fact that the College Board now released Test 5 and Test 6. And Test 5 and Test 6 are significantly harder than Test 1, 2, and 3. Test 4 is okay. I think it's a little bit better than Test 1, 2, and 3. But Test 5 and 6 are much more accurate. And students that have done those, that have been preparing, feel that those were similar to what the real SAT was like. So that's factor number 1. The poor materials really hurt students. Factor number 2 was the PSAT. The PSAT was entirely too easy. Typically in years past, the PSAT is pretty similar to the SAT, but this time around, for whatever reason, the PSAT was so much easier than the digital SAT in March, and that let a lot of students down the wrong road. It really let students think that the digital SAT was going to be easy. Everyone said the test was easy, didn't care that much about their score, and thought that the real SAT was going to be this way, and it was not. It steamrolled everybody that took it, and I would say comment down below, let me know, did you feel that the March SAT was fair? Definitely want to hear from you guys, so let me know down below. Factor number 3 is that students were less prepared for this first SAT than ever before. I think there's a few reasons for that. Number 1, look, it was the first administration of digital SAT. You can't expect to be most prepared the first time you ever take a standardized test. So anyone that did not do well or get the score they wanted on the first digital SAT, you have many more opportunities to do it. And this is totally normal for students taking the test. I think for whatever reason, people wanted this just to be over. They thought this was an easier test. Let me just get this done. And that's not how it works. Standardized testing is a process. It takes strategy, it takes studying, it takes practice. Obviously, a lot of that can be found online. You can find help. You can pay for things like SAT prep courses and tutors. But I felt that students going into this test were a little bit unprepared. Another reason that students were unprepared was that there was only a few practice tests on the Blue Book app. You only had 4 tests. Typically, I like to have my students do at least 6 to 8 tests before they go sit for the real SAT or ACT. The ACT students are in our office every single weekend, grinding it out, taking practice tests. We have those available online as well. That's a great way to prepare yourself for the test, especially if you have a tutor or you're doing a class. For the digital SAT, kids just didn't want to do it. It wasn't focused on. So From a general study perspective, students need to take more practice tests to prepare themselves for what the real test is going to be like. Now, I have a few bonus factors that I think contributed to why students struggled on the first digital SAT. Number one is a lot of students didn't use the Desmos calculator well. Desmos is the strongest tool you can use on the math section of the SAT. It's incredibly helpful in getting about maybe 1/8 of the questions correct very easily. There's some questions that you can just obtain the answer instantaneously by using Desmos, so I highly recommend that you guys check that out. In all of our books and all of our courses, there are Desmos chapters and Desmos reviews to show you guys exactly how to do it. We even have some videos on that as well. You definitely should check those out. You have to learn how to use Desmos, especially if your math score was a little weaker and you fell to the easy module. Sometimes just by using Desmos, you could fall to the harder module and get a much better score. I think another bonus reason was a lot of students didn't realize how challenging it would be to get to the hard module and how much it would affect their score if you don't get to the hard module. If you don't get to the hard module, you're pretty much going to be hard capped in the 1100s. So the main goal for any student preparing for the test that has below a 1200 on the SAT is to master module 1. Make sure you know exactly what you're doing to make sure you get that harder module. Even if you bomb the harder module, you will get a much higher score than that 1000 or 1100 you're at right now. So I highly recommend you try to do that. Obviously, things like courses and books can help with that. So definitely check out whatever materials you need to take care of the test. Finally, there were some crazy issues that I heard of on the first digital SAT. Some students' tests were entirely lacking all parentheses on the exam. It was a mistake on behalf of the College Board. Other students had technological issues. Obviously, this is a small number of people, so I wouldn't worry about that much, but that was a factor for some students. But I think overall, to summarize, I think the main reasons that students thought this SAT was really hard, especially in the math part, was number one, lack of practice materials, number two, lack of practice tests that were indicative of the real exam, and number three, an overly easy PSAT that lulled everybody to sleep when they were taking the exam. Now, if you struggle with this exam, please take the time to prepare. If you do prepare, you can do much better on the exam. There's tons of stuff out there on YouTube, all these content creators creating amazing videos for the digital SAT, so definitely check those out. Learn a strategy, take practice tests, and you will succeed in the test, and I'll see you guys in the next one.